Welcome back to B.Hooked Crochet. I'm your host Brittany, and this is the final pattern of the Tunisian Crochet washcloth series sponsored by Clover USA. With the launch of their new Interchangeable Tunisian Crochet hook set, we're celebrating with 4 washcloth patterns. Each pattern will give you the chance to use your new Clover Tunisian hooks, learn some new Tunisian crochet stitches, and make something practical in the process. If you're following along with this series between August 13th and September 24th, 2017, you still have today to head over to bhookedcrochet.com/washcloth series to enter to win an interchangeable Tunisian hook set from Clover. You can find that link right here on your screen in the top right corner. You'll find that giveaway sign-up form and the details near the bottom of that page. All right, now let's get started on washcloth number 4. We're going to begin our washcloth by making a slip knot, and we need to have a foundation row with 27 stitches. So that means we're going to chain 27, Once you have 27 chains, we're going to go right into the forward pass of the foundation row. And again, I like working in the back bump of the chain, so I'm just going to flip it over. We'll find the second chain from the hook. So this one right here, and you'll work your hook into that chain and pull up a loop and leave it on your hook. And find the next chain, pull up a loop in there, and in the next. So we're not changing anything. If you're following along with this series, we've worked the foundation row for washcloths 1, 2, and 3. We're not doing anything different here. We're just going to pull up a loop in every single chain. Once you've pulled up a loop in every single chain, we've completed the forward pass, and we're going to go right into the return pass. So just like the others, we're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop. That's going to make a nice edge stitch for us, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2, and we're going to repeat that until we only have 1 more loop remaining on our hook. Once we've completed that return pass, then we have our foundation row in place, and we're ready to start with the stitch pattern. For this pattern, we have a 4-row pattern repeat, and it's really quite simple. We're going to be using Tunisian purl stitches and Tunisian knit stitches, which is a new one to us here in the series. So we're going to start off with a Tunisian purl stitch. We're going to just pull the working yarn forward, so lay it right in front of your hook, and locate your first stitch to work into. We're not counting this stitch on the end. We want to find the one that's right next to that. And you'll insert your hook into just that front loop as if we were doing the simple stitch. And then we're just going to pull our working yarn behind, then yarn over and pull through. The next stitch we're going to do is the Tunisian knit stitch. So this time we're going to find the next stitch to work into, and we're going to work our hook in between the 2 bars. So we have a bar on the front, we have a bar on the back. We're going to work the hook in between those 2 bars, and it's going to come out the back side of the work. Then yarn over and pull up a loop. And when we do that, it pulls those 2 bars outward so that it looks like the traditional stockinette stitch in knitting. Not so much with the foundation row, but as your pattern builds, you will see that. Well, that's our stitch repeat for this row. We're going to work a Tunisian purl stitch, followed by a Tunisian knit stitch. Now you may find that when you're working the knit stitches that your foundation row just has a tendency to sort of collapse on itself. And to fix that, if you just do a little bit of stretching to sort of stretch out that stitch, you can really see, instead of the bars being right on top of each other like they normally are, see how it's kind of spreading out for me? I'm just going to insert my hook right into that smaller space and come back out the other side. So you're just going to repeat this sequence until you get to the end of the row. I'll show you how to work that last stitch next. So at the end of row 1, you will end with a purl stitch. And I know this is a purl stitch because I can see that bar right here that's sort of going in front. That gives it that characteristic purl bump. And the knit stitches, as we talked about, sort of look like V's. Now they're a little bit distorted coming off of this foundation row, but that's how you can tell the difference. You've got the bump here, you know that's a purl. You don't, and that's a knit, and then you see that bump there, that's a purl and a knit, and so on. That's going to be really helpful to be able to distinguish as you work through this pattern if you get distracted and you have to put it down. So the last stitch we can't forget, it's that little chain on the side of the work, and we're going to catch 2 loops of the chain. Now they're just sitting right here, nice and pretty for me. I'm catching one of the side loops of the chain, and that line over here, this is the back bump of that chain. So just insert your hook under those 2 loops and pull up a loop. And that's going to complete the forward pass for row 1. The return pass is going to be the same throughout this pattern. We're always going to start off by making a yarn over and pull through 1. It's going to give us a nice clean stitch on the edge. And then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 until we only have 1 loop remaining on our hook. I've completed my return pass for the first row. We're just going to jump right into row number 2, which actually is a repeat of row number 1. We do have a 4-row repeat that we're going to cover in the video, and then we're going to repeat those 4, but there is a small repeat within those 4. So row 1 and row 2 are going to be the same, and row 3 and row 4 are going to be the same. So we're going to start off row 2 with a purl stitch, just like we did before. And then we'll move on to a knit stitch. Now you can see, since we're not on that foundation row, that the 2 bars are situated as they normally would, like you're familiar with seeing them, one right on top of the other. So what I like to do is insert my hook just as if I were going to do a simple stitch, but then let the hook come out the other side. That's how you know you're doing your knit stitch correctly. And when you pull up a loop, see how it's turned those so that it looks like a V. So we're just going to repeat these 2 stitches until we get to the end of the row. We're going to work that final stitch the same way, catching both of the loops. Once you've finished your forward pass, we're going to go into our return pass. Yarn over and pull through 1, and then yarn over and pull through 2 until you get to the end of your row. Moving on to row number 3, we're not really changing anything with our stitch pattern repeat. We're still going to alternate purl stitches and knit stitches, but we're changing how we start off. So in rows 1 and 2, we started with a purl stitch. And in rows 3 and 4, we're going to start with a knit stitch. So I'm just going to locate my first stitch there, insert my hook, and work a Tunisian purl stitch. And then I'm going to go into my same repeat. I'm going to follow that up with a purl stitch, and then knit stitch and purl stitch. And so we're doing this to create a basket weave pattern. Once you get a few more rows worked up, you're going to see the nice pretty little V's from the knit stitch, and you'll see the purl bumps for the purls, and then we're shifting them over. And you'll see that basket weave pattern emerge once we get through a few more rows. For row 3, when you get to the end of your row, you're going to end on a knit stitch, and then we're going to work our last stitch the same. So catching 2 of those loops from that chain and pull up a loop. Now the return pass is the same. Yarn over and pull through 1, and then yarn over and pull through 2 to the end of the row. The last row in our repeat is row number 4, and it's a repeat of row 3. So we're going to find our first stitch and work a Tunisian knit stitch there, and then a purl stitch, followed by another knit stitch, and a purl. We're just going to repeat this to the end of the row. Once you finish the forward pass of row 4, your work should look something like this. We can really start to see that basket weave pattern taking shape. So we're going to work the return pass the same way as we did for the other 3 rows. So once you've finished up that return pass from row 4, we're now going into our repeat. So we're going to repeat the last 4 rows until our washcloth measures approximately 8 inches from this bottom edge. Now when you stop, you'll need to make sure that you have completed the forward pass and the return pass of a row 1. So just keep an eye on your rows. So rows 1 and 2 is where we start on a purl. Row 3 and 4, we start on a knit. So in order to make this even on both sides, we want to have 2 purl rows at the other side of the washcloth. So that way it looks the same on both sides. So we're going to complete row 1, so we'll have 1 finished row where we start on the purl, and then we're going to pick up on row 2 is where we're going to do our bind off row. Once you have the length of your washcloth worked up, you want to make sure that you have stopped at the end of a return pass from row 1. Now once you have started there, we're ready to go ahead with the bind off. And just like the other patterns, we're going to make sure we bind off in pattern. So all that means is we're going to work our stitch as we normally would. So starting with a purl stitch, I'm technically working on row number 2 here, although I'm binding it off as I go. I'll work my purl stitch first. And then instead of moving on to the next stitch like I normally would, I'm going to pull this loop through this loop here. And that's going to bind that stitch off. Now my next stitch would be a knit stitch. So I'll work that and bind it off. A purl stitch next. And bind it off. And we're just going to repeat that until we get to the end of the row. When we get to the end of the row, we're going to work into that chain just like we have throughout the pattern, catching those 2 loops of the chain and bind that off. We can go ahead and cut our working yarn, pull that loop, or pull that tail through the loop on your hook. And then all we need to do is weave in our ends. So let's look at the best way to do that. So the side that we're looking at here is the right side of the work. This is what we were looking at the whole time as we were working through the pattern. We want to weave in our ends along the back side, and there is a little bit of a different texture here, so you can tell the difference from one side to the other. Go ahead and thread one of your tails on your darning needle. And I'm going to work this down a row here just to sort of hide that little knot in that join. And what I like to do for this stitch pattern is locate this ridge right here. So this is kind of like the chain when we work our return pass. I'm just going to catch some of the loops in that chain and conceal my ends there. Now I'm going in the same direction every time, so it's sort of weaving it around the loops. Now you'll work this in one direction for a couple of inches. And then we can go ahead and work back in the other way. This is going to make sure our end doesn't come out. And so I'm just going to jump down to that next row, that really dense row right here, and weave in the tail along that. And once you're certain it's nice and secure, you can go ahead and trim. And that completes our 4th washcloth.